Right, good evening, everybody, and a very happy new year to those of you that I haven't wished happy new year, and welcome to this first meeting of the Customer Corporate Services and Scrutiny Management Committee of 2023. If I could just remind you all quickly to make sure your phones are turned off or on silent. We're not expecting a fire alarm to go off. I think everybody in here knows the way out if that does happen, and you all know where the toilets are and those sorts of things as well. I have not received any apologies for this evening. We are missing Councillor Pearson at the moment, but we understand he's on his way and will be joining us shortly. So I can move us on to the first item of the agenda, which is declarations of interest. Do I have any declarations? Councillor Fisher.
Just to note that I was the organiser of petition 178 on page 119.
Okay. No others that I can see, so I can move us on to agenda item 2, which is the minutes. We've got 2 sets of minutes to approve. The first from 31st of October, which are on page 1. So is everybody happy? I can sign those. Seeing nods, thank you. And the second set on page 5, which is from 7th of November. Again, is everybody happy that they're an accurate record? That's great. I just wanted to note that we had asked for the monitoring officer to circulate an update on whether or not the legal advice received last year regarding city centre access for blue badge holders satisfied in relation to a Westminster High Court judgment.
I'm in the process of obtaining that view.
That's fantastic. As long as we know that that's on its way, that's fantastic. And then Dawn, I don't know whether you're able to answer, but we'd also asked that a report on the reverse the ban petition went forward to a future executive, and that's not currently on the forward plan.
Yeah.
Do we have a timescale for that at the moment? Do you know?
I don't know. Off the top of my head, no. I would have to go away and find out.
Okay, so if we could just make a note of that, just to be clear on that, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay, and so then if I move us on to agenda item 3, which is public participation. We have one member of the public registered to speak, who will be speaking to us via Zoom. So Flick Williams, are you able to hear us?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening, we can hear you loud and clear. So I know that you've spoken at this committee before. You have 3 minutes to address the committee, and I'll give you a 30-second warning when you're about to coming to the end of your time. So if you'd like to just start in your own time.
I welcome the arrival of the new access officer and wish him a long and successful tenure. I welcome the creation of the new Access Forum, which is in the process of being constituted, and look forward to sharing my knowledge of access, disability equality and inclusion with it. However, these issues do remain the responsibility of all across the whole authority, and I note the progress or lack of it with regard to a number of agreed actions. Annex A, page 2, ensures sufficient provision of changing places toilets. This motion was passed in July 2021, and the announcement of £250,000 funding made in April last year, yet zero progress. YDRF has been in correspondence over major problems with the woefully inadequate existing provision, which have yet to be resolved, and Scrutiny's oversight of the whole situation regarding accessible toilets would be welcomed. But my main purpose for being here today is to ask for scrutiny over access for disabled people during the 6 weeks of the Christmas market. Any city centre access plan that gets cast aside for such a lengthy period in the busiest season of the year is grossly unfair and discriminatory. The council's public relations machine spits out constant repetition of the city is welcoming to all, but it is not. January again finds us left with the broken ramps as reports roll in of access refusals at barriers and wrongly issued parking tickets to blue badge holders. Only this year was much worse than any previous. Many streets became dangerously overcrowded and the risk of being knocked over, trampled or crushed alarmingly real. Buskers displaced from King Square by the merry-go-round blocked the road junction between Market Street and Parliament Street, making it impassable. ITV Canada filmed with several disabled people, and the film crew commented at the hostility we received from members of the public who vented their stress at the situation on us and our wheelchairs and white canes. Park and ride services were overwhelmed and running up to 90 minutes behind timetable. Queues for car parks snarled up the whole road network to the detriment of local bus services. It is extremely unedifying to hear a member of the executive, when presented with this, respond with there being a victim of their own success. No, try absence of proper planning. I'm concerned that everything connected with this Christmas market is battered to make it York, whose primary concern is commercial interests. None of us elected this company, and proper oversight and scrutiny is now needed before another year passes. To add insult to injury, Make It York, in their response to the media, used the term additional needs. No, Make It York, we are disabled people whom you disable by covering tactile paving and blocking access. Additional needs or special needs is the language of burden and of our oppression. And as you operate and as an arm of the council, you need to recognise that this council adopted the social model and train your staff accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was bang on 3 minutes. I sensed you were drawing to a close, so I thought I'd leave you to it. But your comments have been noted by the committee, and your request for a scrutiny review is also noted. I think we'll probably need to just discuss that when we get to looking at our work planning item, which is a little way further down the agenda this evening. And that may be something that isn't necessarily something for this committee to look into. But as I say, when we get to that item, we'll be able to have a discussion about how best to handle that request. So thank you very much for your time this evening. And you're of course welcome to carry on watching on YouTube. So if I move us on now to agenda item 4, which is the Finance and Performance Monitor 2. And if I could invite Debbie Mitchell and Ian Cunningham to the table. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Just to introduce you properly while you're sitting down, Debbie Mitchell is Chief Finance Officer in Section 151, and Ian Cunningham is Head of Business Intelligence. I'm conscious that this report is a little late, shall we say, not your fault at all, but it only runs up to the 30th of September. So I wonder whether perhaps in introducing the report, you could just highlight any areas of significant change or give us any updates on anything that we might need to know that's changed since this was put together. And then obviously members may have questions.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start off. Yes, you're right. It's been a while coming. I think this is our third time look, isn't it, at this report, or at least the second attempt. So this is the second finance and performance monitoring report of the year that highlights the main forecast variations. And you'll see those pressures in social care continue to be seen, and they are continuing to be seen. Monitor 3 is just being prepared, ready for February executive. And so we are continuing to see those pressures, those financial pressures within social care. Clearly, they are not unique to York and are being seen, I think, in most of the councils across the country. Work is ongoing to address these challenges, and we are putting in place mitigations, cost control strategies to make every attempt to balance the budget by the end of the financial year. However, as I think we've outlined at this particular committee before, it's clearly a very serious situation. A financial challenge of this level will continue to require a significant amount of work. And if we are unable to mitigate the position at the year end to the point that it does balance, then that will require us to dip into our general reserve of just under £7 million. I think that will in turn then put pressure on the financial resilience of the council, because our reserves would then drop below our minimum recommended level. So the summary position is outlined at table 1, I think in paragraph 13. And certainly the early indications that we're doing for monitor 3, that bottom line is not changing too much, so that you'll see a similar figure again at monitor 3. The detailed analysis of the finance and I think the performance was included in the original executive report. So I don't think we've reproduced that here, have we, Ian? Background papers will give that as reference. So I'll hand over to Ian to cover the performance.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Debbie. So performance, what should I highlight here? Well, I think it's a very similar place actually to Q1, the Q2 performance. And to answer your question, Chair, how's that continued on? I don't think there's been any of those indicators that have massively changed direction. You can see within the paper, sickness in the workforce has been on that very slight upward trend still. The the responses to complaints and FOIs in terms of timeliness is in pretty good position still for the authority. I'm sure you'll see the report later today. The processing around things like housing benefits are in a good place. One of the challenges here within the report around the customer services times, taking the calls on the phone. You can see here within the report, it states call waiting times have gone up about a minute on average, okay, which has been a challenge to the authority. And I think in the intervening time, actually, you've probably had Pauline bring a report to you actually on the customer services and chat with you. Maybe I'll just say a point towards Q3 where it's looking like we should get much better results in Q3, moving much closer to the minute, which has been kind of the long-standing waiting time of the authority for calls. So coming back down. So slightly disappointing with results for phone times within Q2, but looking much better for Q3. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to ask a quick sort of hopefully scene setting question to yourself, Debbie, and then obviously open up to members to ask questions. And it's just to do with paragraph 5 talks about the sort of recurring budget pressures and the mitigations that we've been able to use in previous years have been sort of one-off things. I think, for example, we got quite a lot of money as a COVID kind of thing. Is there any indication that there may be any sort of one-off support or because I know in previous years pre-COVID there has occasionally been money that's been available or become available at the last minute, or are we, when we're looking at a potentially nearly 4 million overspend, that actually this time we're not going to get that bailout at the last minute?
Well, there's always the opportunities, and there's always the chance that money will become available, and that is because I guess we're a nation of optimists, and so people even at this stage of the year will think that they are going to deliver on their projects and they will finish their scheme and they will deliver it by the 31st of March. And often that's not the case, and so that does occasionally release funding. Equally, whilst we are doing the forecast, we try and take a realistic assessment of, say, vacant posts, and again, managers out to recruitment will perhaps work on the assumption that they will fill that post, and as I think we've seen across most services of the council, recruitment remains a challenge. So I do expect there will be more underspends at year end in some service areas, but I'm not expecting any additional money from government for the current financial year.
Thank you. So over to members if anybody has any questions. Councillor Fenton. An auspicious start to the year there.
There you go. Thank you. Just a couple of questions if I may. On paragraph 5, for Q2, there was a comment around the anticipated impact of the pay awards. I just wondered whether that had come in as anticipated or better or worse, however you want to look at it. And paragraph 26 about the a comparison of our sickness days per FTE. There was reference to comparative figures not yet being available. I just wondered, Ian, whether those were now available, just to see how our figures compare with in comparison with other authorities. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So yes, it was a long time ago I wrote this report, wasn't it? So at the time of writing this report, the pay award hadn't been finalised. It has now been finalised, and yes, it did add another 2.5 million to the total pressures. But we did have funding set aside for pay award, and so we've been able to manage that within as far as we can. But it has added to the pressures across the council.
And picking up the question about sickness benchmarking, one of those challenges. So there's still nothing official. We have written to all of the local authorities in Yorkshire and Humber through the heads of HR meeting there. And while most of them don't want to put their figure in public if they don't have to, they've come back around about the 11 days per year level. So that is slightly below us. We're hoping that SITFA will release something, which is where we've got the 8 days from previously. The only other thing I could probably mention is the children's workforce census, which came back at around about 11.5 to 12 days per year. Okay, so those are national or regional comparators, that there's not solid science in those. There's certainly different ways of local authorities recording sickness differently. So I'd say we're looking slightly above, but within a range. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Norman.
Just kind of following on from that, and apologies, this is sort of veering into next quarter, i.e. this quarter, I guess, but just on 28, you talk about potential winter sickness impact. Has that been significant, if that's not too current a question?
Obviously, within the figure, it compares one winter against another because it's a rolling 12 months total. So it's a question, has sickness been higher this winter than previous? I think we've probably seen about the same levels of COVID in the workforce from the unofficial figures. I think we've probably seen a little bit more illness with flus, colds, coughs than we've seen previously. The stress levels that we monitor unofficially within the authority are around about the same levels as last year. So I'd expect probably the sickness level in the Q3 monitor to be slightly higher than this, but not outside of the range. Okay, which is a good sign for the authority, isn't it? Because having an available workforce is very important.
I think when we get to work planning, one of the things that we might want to consider as a committee is it is a little while since we've had a more detailed sickness update, and we were as a committee monitoring the day one absence programme and how that was impacting and that sort of thing. So there may be something that we want a little bit more detail on that. Just looking around the room for any further indications for questions. I do have a couple, but happy to have other people first. So I will just bring up, I did mention it to you previously, just before the start of the meeting, Ian, just around the call answering data and information, and paragraph 29, which talks about the percentage of calls that are answered and the time in which certain percentages of calls are answered. My reading of that was, first of all, that we're actually only answering 70%, so nearly a third of people, more than a third of people calling are not actually getting answered, which does concern me. And then the other was that if we're answering 27% within 20 seconds, but our average wait time is 3 minutes odd, then actually for the other nearly 3/4 of calls, the average wait time must be quite significantly above 3 minutes. And I appreciate what you said about that number is coming down, which is obviously very welcome. But I just wondered what level of monitoring we're doing at the sort of different percentiles of call waiting times.
So the point in there about if we take out the people that are being answered within 20 seconds, does that push everybody else's time up? Okay, yeah, absolutely. There will be a different average based on the people outside of the 20 seconds. The other comment in there was 70% of calls are answered, but that doesn't just mean that 30% of people don't get answered. It means that 30% of people might choose to go down a different route, okay, or not full or finish through with that call. And then your last point is, do we measure all the different percentiles of calls and the different groupings that they come in from? Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm 99% sure they're a data person giving out a statistic, but I'm sure it's already on the open data platform where we break down each of the different call logs and the groupings that people come in for and into the departments, and we break down the groupings. We give figures on not just the average waiting time, the max waiting time, the min waiting time. We probably do some deciles in there as well. As previous committees, I can pull that out and share that round for the next committee. And if you'd like me to include some of that in future reports, happy to do so.
Yeah, I think that would certainly be welcome if you could circulate a little bit more detail to us as a committee. But I think in terms of future reporting, even if it's the first 25% and the last 25%, just to understand where the range is really from, because as I say, I did a bit of sort of back of the fag bucket maths, and if you take out that bottom 27% of assuming that they're all answered in 20 seconds exactly, it does then mean that the average goes up by more than a minute for everybody else, which obviously becomes quite significant. Just on the point of the calls not answered though, because I appreciate in a sense what you're saying, that people may have chosen to ring off or chosen to access the website or you know, otherwise. Do we have any way, I'm assuming that the answer is no, but do we have any way of measuring or recording or trying to understand how and whether people have actually found a different route, even if it's that we survey a percentage of our customers, as it were, to understand how they first tried to contact the council and how they actually got the information that they needed?
Not sure. I mean,
I do appreciate
I'll
it's asking you to know what we don't know.
Yeah. So within some of our customer surveys, we ask about people's experience on that call, but do we track anybody's IDs, initials, telephone numbers to see what other route they came in by? We don't do that as an authority. We probably could ask something a little bit better within some of the council surveys. So customer satisfaction ones that go out, the tenant satisfaction one, to see why people drop out of calls. And there will be some data in there that will allow us to have a think about it. I can have a look into that and maybe come back.
I think that would be helpful, and it may be that actually it is something that it would be, you know, may require a more in-depth scrutiny or something like that. I don't know, but I'm sure that, you know, other members around the table will have the same experience that I do of residents contacting us saying, I've tried and I can't get through, and so trying to understand what happens to that nearly a third of people who tried to contact the council and don't get through on the first occasion, they may get through on subsequent occasions. I think, you know, that would certainly be something that you know, I'd think would be valuable. Councillor Norman.
Just very quickly on paragraph 32, page 18, the last bullet point, 31, sorry. The last bullet point around the 900,000 pages being reviewed. Does that mean sort of viewed by the public or reviewed by what kind of is that?
Yeah, that will be hits in effect. So yeah, something that we monitor, hits across the website and then all the different pages. So that will be total hits, just probably sloppy language really.
That's okay. That's right. That's fine, thank you.
Okay, a final question from me then, if nobody else is flagging up to me. I just want to clarify a number and then ask a question related to it. So paragraph 8 on page 12 says that we're facing projected 7.7 million pressure, but after mitigation that becomes 3.7. Then at paragraph 13, it says council is facing net financial pressures of 7.7 million after mitigation. And I wasn't sure whether that was just a typo.
That is, sorry, Chair, that is just a typo, yes.
So it is 3.7 million.
Yes. Yeah.
So then on to paragraph 18, where at the back end of that paragraph, it sort of says if we do find ourselves in a position of having to go into the reserves, that will then give a pressure onto the next financial year and actually, as it happens, to the next administration effectively. Would your expectation be that the pressure would be to essentially return that money back up to the 6.8 million in the first year, or would that be something that you would be looking at spreading across 4 years, or you know, how would you see that happening?
My preference would be to put it all back in year one. That would be what I, as the 151 officer, that would be the most robust financial position for the council. That would give us the most resilience should something unexpected happen. But obviously I would have to be realistic about what the impact of that would be on the rest of the council and on the services that we could deliver. So it would be a case of working with the administration and with senior managers to come up with what would be the most achievable and realistic. There's no point in me insisting that it all goes back in year one, and then that means the council can't provide statutory service, for example. So it would have to be, you know, a sort of a balanced approach. But obviously, you know, there would be that tension between, I guess, me wanting to put it back straight away and others maybe not. So we would try and work our way through that.
Okay, thank you. I'll just note Councillor Pearson's arrival and wish you a happy new year, as I did to everybody else. And unless you had a burning question on agenda item 4, which we're just coming to the end of, I will include that item. And thank you, Ian, for coming along this evening. Debbie, I think we're going to hang on to you for the next agenda item, which was actually deferred from previous meeting. So this was a budget setting overview process. I think in reality now we're sort of so far through that really this is mainly to note. If there are any questions from members, very happy to take them. I just had one question which I'll put to you before you even speak to anything on the report, because I think it's just need a little update. Page 26, the original intention I think was that there would be exec member decision sessions publishing budget proposals in December. Obviously that hasn't happened, partly I believe because of the government not releasing its funding settlement. But if you could just talk us through what the revised sort of timetable will be from this point through to February, that would just be really helpful, I think.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Chair. That this was the kind of the usual annual budget setting process. And it feels a while since we've had a usual year, doesn't it, really? You know, it was the ongoing kind of financial uncertainty at a national level. I think at the time I originally wrote this report, when this was originally due to come, it was in that period where we kind of had 3 chancellors in a week kind of thing, and we were having a budget, and then we weren't having a budget, and then so it was an incredibly uncertain period in terms of both the national economy and financial planning for local government. So yes, you're absolutely right. Ordinarily, well, certainly in last year, I think the year before it was January, but certainly the current administration has endeavoured to publish its budget proposals as early as it can, and it did manage that in December last year. For those reasons of that national uncertainty and that national picture, we just weren't able to support the administration in doing that this year. There just wasn't the time to do it. And so what has been decided instead is that the executive member for finance and major projects is having their decision on Thursday this week, their decision session, and there is one combined report rather than the individual decision sessions for individual executive members. But after that, it's kind of business as usual in terms of the timetable. So the budget reports will be presented to executive on the 9th of February and then on to full council on the 23rd, is it done? Yeah. And so it's really just that kind of discretionary stage in the middle, if you like, as whichever is the administration, whether they want to publish early or not. And that's been different each time.
Okay, so thanks for that summary. Sorry, I was just distracted by the next people just coming to check if we were on time, and we are on time, so that's great. So just to understand, so if it's on Thursday, then it'll be out published already, be in the public domain already, and I haven't had a look at it, so I haven't seen it. I just want to double check. I think in previous years what we've tended to do is have quite detailed budget reports for each sort of session of exec members, which have then been sort of brought together into a thing that goes to executive. But in effect, are we having now a single report which will go through the exec member and then up to executive, and then ultimately to council?
Yeah, there was always,
so what's in the public domain now is a section. Yeah. That's it, basically, I suppose.
It was always one report that we would then break down into individual sections for those individual exec member decisions. Then we will bring it back together for the executive. So certainly from my point of view, it's been much more straightforward to just do one exec member decision session report this time. But yes, we would have ordinarily done different ones, but it will be the same core information. Just I guess more opportunities for residents to come and speak at those meetings, but that's just, there's not been the time for that this year.
Okay. Does anybody have any other question that we haven't covered within that, or are we happy with that? No. Okay. Thank you very much, then, Debbie. Thanks for your time this evening. So I'll move us on to agenda item 6, which is the scrutiny review support budget. Dawn, I don't know if you want to just speak to it very briefly. Again, this was deferred from November's meeting. And we do just need to make a decision about a recommendation on it.
Yeah, very briefly, I think members of the committee will remember from previous years' experience. This is the report that you get annually to match your entitlement to comment on what you might wish to recommend to the executive and to council as part of the budget setting process for your scrutiny research support budget, which was the one that was traditionally used to, if you like, if we were doing an external review and we needed to buy in some external consultancy advice, you would use this budget to do it. It's currently set at 5,000, has been set at 5,000 for a few years now, when you've assessed it individually each year. You can see from the level of spend over the last X years, you'd have to make a very good argument, I think, for increasing it, is all I would say. But I will leave the debate to your good selves.
So I'm happy to take any thoughts from members. Councillor Fenton.
I agree with Dawn that increasing the budget, which is very rarely spent, would be difficult to justify. But I still think there's a case for retaining it, retaining a nominal sum. I can't think of a reason to change from the current nominal sum. I think it more as a signal, really, that we do want scrutiny to be able to access support, and whether that's from residents, whether it's paid for, to help us with our work. So I think it would be appropriate to retain it and try to make use of it.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you on that, Councillor Fenton. I think having the access to it, were it needed, I think is important. And I also think that if it was forgone one year, it would be very, very difficult to argue for it back again. And it is such a nominal amount in the grand scheme of everything that I don't think it has any significant budget implication in the wider sense. But I think that actually being able to access small amounts of funding for scrutiny research is really important for committee's work. I think the only note that I'm going to just make, and this is absolutely not directed at them services in any way whatsoever, but you know, I have recorded on a number of occasions an ongoing frustration at the lack of dedicated scrutiny officer time for supporting not just this committee, but all the scrutiny committees at the council. And I think perhaps one of the reasons why research budgets haven't been used over the last few years is because members haven't necessarily been aware of how they might use them, what value they could bring to the council by doing some bits of external support. I know as statutory screening officer, you've always been very supportive of the committee. So as I say, it's about having dedicated scrutiny support time, not having the physical support from the Dem Services officers that we do have. I'm looking at Dawn, but I'm going to look at Jane as well. And say, you know, it's very, very welcome, very, very much appreciated. But as I say, I think my view would be that as a committee, as well as asking for the ongoing 5,000 support, we should also be noting some frustration at the lack of dedicated officer support time. So if members are willing to support me in that, I'd be happy to just make a note of that to Chief Operating Officer and Council Leader. Yeah, all happy to do that. Okay.
Can I make one small comment?
You can.
I'm sorry. I feel the obligated need to do so as statutory scrutiny officer, but just to comment, I accept, you know, the points that you've made, Chair, absolutely. But just to add, just so that members are aware, that even when you did have dedicated scrutiny research officers, you did not spend this budget. It inevitably comes back to your choice of topic. And I don't just mean the people sitting around the room now, I mean across all scrutiny committees, the choice of topic will dictate what support you need in order to undertake that review. Just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, absolutely fair comment. And again, you know, for members' benefit, myself, Councillor Fenton, Dawn and Bryn as monitoring officer have all been discussing how we might think about scrutiny training for all future members of scrutiny committees and officers as well, in terms of you know, how to make the most of the scrutiny function that's available to us as of, you know, beyond May, effectively. Okay, so I will just did we formally move and note that, or did we just do it on nods? But I will just formally move that we take option 2, which is to recommend executive retains the current budgetary support for external research and consultancy work. So if I could just see a show of hands from everybody in favour. That's great. Okay, and I will move us on then to agenda item 7. I'm just going to note the time, and after we've done this agenda item, I'm going to take a short adjournment, just so that we don't end up with a very, very long meeting all in one go. But I think it's probably a little bit early to adjourn now. So if I can invite Lorraine Lunt and Kath Murray to the table. So Lorraine is the Information Governance and Feedback Team Manager, and Kath Murray is Corporate Governance Operational Manager. And this is the annual report that comes to us. I did have to push you back a little bit in terms of our scheduling. So I know that you came to us saying you'd like to bring it to us several months ago, and just as the way that scheduling has been, it's taken us till now to get to it. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. But if you could perhaps just speak to the report, and then obviously members may have questions.
Good evening, committee. This is the annual complaints report covering adult social care and children's social care legislation complaints, and also those dealt with through the corporate policy. And it is for the reporting period April 2021 to March 2022. So it also includes information on the local government and social care ombudsman cases and findings, and also there was 3 housing ombudsman services cases in that reporting period as well. So just moving on to giving you a brief overview of what's in the annual complaints report. So it does cover compliments as well. So it is always good to ensure that we have that balanced approach and view of the information and the requests coming into the council. So it's really helpful to give you some indication of some of the compliments that the different council services receive. In children's social care complaints, we grade and make an assessment when we receive the complaint, and we look at the severity, the complexity, the risk to the customer and other customers, the risk to the authority, the history of similar complaints and likelihood of future similar complaints to grade that complaint within the children's social care legislation requirements. In this reporting period, through that legislative process, we had 42 cases through the children's social care complaints, and that had fallen from the previous reporting year. There was an increase, however, in those complaints regarding children's social care services that we dealt with through the corporate complaints process, and that was 4 in that reporting period. What we do want to draw your attention to is that the increase in complaints dealt with and or received isn't always necessarily a bad thing or an indication, although it can point us into directions to look at for improvements. It is also potentially national trends, but also the fact that the ability to access and raise complaints is made more accessible and easier, and people are supported to do so. So from the work undertaken in children's social care legislation complaints, we determined that there were a few factors that had led to these figures. These were the actions that we'd taken from the previous annual local government and social care ombudsman report, and worked with senior managers and service areas in children's social care to make those improvements and identify where there were themes and recurring issues coming through the complaints process. The feedback from complaints, especially where these are related to recurring themes, does provide the service areas with invaluable information to review and improve their service areas. And it also highlighted in this reporting period that the main theme in children's social care was around a lack of action, including failings in communicating with customers and complainants. We have started a programme of work. We haven't waited until now to come with you to the report, but we have started a programme of work with the managers and the teams in children's social care services to identify and improve those areas and themes. There was also some concerns raised regarding where responses were sent late or where there was no responses sent or no recorded responses sent through my team. That can often be that the service area may have spoken to the complainant and resolved it in that way and forgotten or not let us know that that's what they've done, and or they've just missed sending us a copy of their final response for us to put on the system. So again, we're raising that with the service areas and the managers to make sure that those reported no responses or late responses are actually not just due to forgetting part of the process. Moving on to adult social care, again, we've given you a brief overview of some of the compliments that have been received into that area, but also looking at the adult social care complaints legislative process. We look at assessing those using the Department of Health's tool for grading and assessing the seriousness of complaints and to decide the relevant actions that we need to take going forward. In this reporting period, there was an increase in the total number of complaints compared to the previous reporting year that were dealt with under the adult social care legislation procedures. And that had risen from 28 the previous year to 42 in this reporting period. This included 3 graded as red, so they have a red, amber and green assessment grading, and that was compared to 0 in the years previous. It's important to note that although we've received a larger number of complaints, as I said, in children's social care, it's not always a negative. It can be partly a reflection that the procedures we have in place are accessible and customers are supported to make complaints, which provides that invaluable feedback in areas of improvements for service areas and managers. Feedback from complaints, especially when they're related themes, does provide that, as I say, invaluable information to service areas to look at and how they can improve going forward. In this annual report, the adult social care legislation complaint themes were mostly disagreeing with the assessment, a lack of action and quality of advice and communication. So again, you can see there's a bit of a recurrent theme and overlap of themes with children's social care complaints as well. That ability to keep good communication channels open and the quality of that communication with the complainants. My team continue to work with the senior managers to ensure that those lessons are learned and that those themes are picked up, and we look to reduce those going forward. Moving on to the corporate complaints process. So if you remember, we moved into, for this reporting cycle, the new 4 C's. So the compliments, complaints, concerns, there's always one, comments. And we moved from the hierarchical three-stage approach to an assessed and graded 2-level approach. So again, you'll see some of the compliments that come into the different service areas across the council through that process. Again, we mirrored the legislation and the best practice in how to assess the complaints that we're receiving under that process. And so again, we look at the risk, the severity of the risk, and whether the issues in question are a one-off or they're a reoccurrence or their likelihood to reoccur. Again, we've just noted for your information that the grade 1 and grade 2 and the timescales for responses. As you'll notice, the Housing Ombudsman Services, or the Housing Services Ombudsman, has recently produced their self-assessment and their code of practice for complaints that would ultimately reach them as the Ombudsman, and they've indicated that they want that timescale of 10 and 20 days. So we have put those in brackets, and any complaint that could potentially reach the Housing Ombudsman rather than the LGSCO, we work within those timescales that the Housing Ombudsman requires. We've put that information on the website, council's website, and we're also attending the tenants scrutiny panel in February to go through that with them as well. Whilst it's important to look at the number of complaints, etc., received across the different services, what I will draw your attention to, there is always one service area that has much more than any other service area in the council, but that's because they're the service area that will have some sort of service to every household in York at least once a week. So it is that they have that more interaction and service to the council. Again, just using the information from corporate complaints gives us a real good indication of how services are delivered, and examples of the improvements that we've made from introducing the 4 Cs is the parking team check the counters on the car parks on a quarterly basis. There's reminders to crew and better monitoring, and reminders to staff about access arrangements for assisted waste collection has been a real improvement in the last 12 months in this reporting cycle. Moving on to the local government social care ombudsman's overview. As you all may already be aware, there is an annual letter that the ombudsman sends into the council and publishes on their website annually, along with the performance table, etc. That helps us assess our performance in handling complaints, and also looking at benchmarking and other local authorities' performance in their case handling and their remedies and recommendations made through that process. In this reporting cycle, the council had 71 cases concluded within that time. It's not how many they've received in that time period, but how many investigations they've concluded. And of the 71 cases, 22 were considered as a detailed investigation, and it's of those that they do their performance reporting on. So within the annual complaints report, we have put more details in about the numbers, if you break them down into the number of cases they've dealt with. For example, some cases may be referred back to the council because they've not exhausted our processes, or some may be closed with no action because we've already taken the satisfactory remedies and or dealt with the complaint at that point in time. I understand that's a whistle-stop tour of a lengthy and detailed annual complaints report. However, I'm happy to move on to questions on the actual report itself, if that's okay with committee.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. That's as you say, whistle stop through a sort of huge amount of data there. I can see Councillor Fisher with a hand up, so I will go to yourself first.
Thank you, Chair. My comment is about page 61, stage 3 outcomes. There seems to be some difference between the amount of upheld, partially upheld and not upheld and the other data in there. I'm not quite sure what the ones in the last column indicate, whether they're upheld or not. It's page 61, the bottom table. I was trying to figure out whether there are actually more cases that some say it appears to be 3 cases, but only 1 reported, and I couldn't quite figure out what was going on.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll take that away and make sure that the information that's pulled off the report machine is accurate and which one it is and which one it isn't.
Thank you very much.
In a similar vein, then, before I come to you, Councillor Fenton, I just had a query about data sets. Page 82. So the table in the middle, there's 3 tables on page 82. The middle table has the Children Education Communities and the Health and Adult Social Care Directorates, which were merged the following year into the People Directorate.
Okay.
But if you look at the numbers, the data in terms of the responses, in 2020-21, Children Education Communities has 2, Adult Social Care has 71. And then the following year, the People's Directorate just has 1, which either they've suddenly transformed and doing wonderfully well, or possibly their data is being counted within the customer communities above, which is 85. And I just wonder whether there's just been as the directorates have changed, the data sets haven't necessarily mapped across or been labelled correctly.
Again, I will definitely take that back and check, because that does sound sensible. That does sound maybe what it's done, and it's reading from the wrong service area into the wrong new directorate name, but the figures do seem to correlate to the previous year's total.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll take that away and just double check and read.
I mean, I think we can still sort of infer what the outcomes have been from reading the table, but just
it doesn't add up.
Just to be clear on it. Okay, so Councillor Fenton, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. It doesn't seem that long since we had the last one, and I recall some of the themes were the same in terms of complaints about how information is communicated as much as outcomes, and it was good to hear that steps you're taking to address those issues with managers as best you can. A couple of questions. One on the, I suppose, frustrations you have in that where stage one complaints are a response is sent by the manager, but you're not copied in. Whether you've considered asking managers to provide you with a response that then you send off from your team to the complainant as potentially a way to take out the second guessing or wonder whether the manager has responded, or whether you've concluded that that would generate so much more additional work for your team that you haven't gone down that route. It would be interesting to see whether you've thought of that. And second question on the financial recompense figures at the end of the report, that there does seem to be a kind of a sliding scale from £50 upwards. I just wondered whether that was how an assessment is made of what an appropriate payment would be, given the nature of the complaint that's been upheld, and whether there is some kind of national formula that we use, or whether we just made up our own scale of compensation payments. But it just struck me as something that would be interesting to know how the framework within which you work when deciding on what an appropriate payment should be. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll answer first the suggestion about getting the responses sent to us to send on behalf of the service area, and then I'll leave Kath as the expert on the understanding the Ombudsman's matrix on working out a suitable recompense payment. It is a very good suggestion. Thank you very much. We have in the past done it in several different ways and trialed in different ways in how to best and keep it in time, doing that either additional step of coming back into us and or going back out to service areas sending responses. What we have seen though with the improvements that we've been able to achieve using the corporate 4Cs approach, and that work coming back into the corporate governance team rather than going out to service areas to manage and do the investigations, the recommendations reports and the response. We have seen significant improvements in that area, and so what we're doing as part of the ongoing discussions with adults and children's is looking at how can we start to achieve the same improvements and successes within adults and children's social care, learning from that. So absolutely, I'll take that one away again and keep that on the table, and I'll now defer to Kath to explain the Ombudsman's matrix of payments.
So yes, there is an Ombudsman remedy guidance that's on the Ombudsman website that we use. We also work with the social care managers across the Yorkshire and Humberside region to make sure that we're applying that in a consistent way. And we've got some guidance with some calculators for how we do that, that looks at things like kind of the severity of the detriment to the person, how well they were kept informed, how long it went on for, and any circumstances particular to their case to help us look at what that appropriate remedy should be. And also making sure that we're not just looking at the financial remedies and not just looking at, I think one of the big things that we're really wanting to push and have been doing that kind of more and more during this year, it's always been something that we've done, but we're really trying to emphasise that we don't just want managers to work with us to remedy the individual complaint, but to look at what lessons we need to learn to improve services and make sure that that complaint isn't reoccurring and happening again and again. And I think that's a big part of what we really want to kind of step up again over the coming year.
Thank you. I have Councillor Norman next, and then Councillor Fisher after that.
Thank you. I think this kind of ties in, hopefully, to that end bit quite nicely, the learning lessons bit. Page 85, where there's quite a lengthy discussion about bins, and I apologise for coming onto the subject, but it seems to me in this particularly this first section where we're discussing the problem with bin complaints, that we get a lot that are resolved once it comes to a complaint that takes a lot of time, effort and energy, and it turns out that probably it was us that lost the bin in the first place. it seems as if that's reaching in these paragraphs, reaching towards saying that you're working towards a solution with managers. Are you? Is there some ongoing work there? What's the kind of, because it seems to me there should be some kind of potential way of doing it that doesn't mean a complaint has to happen in every case.
So yes, there is some ongoing work with the managers within waste services and that directorate. And really then recognising that actually maybe, and again, some of this might be about working with the customer centre as well, so that there's some questions that we might ask as part of the investigation that maybe the customer centre can ask, so they can identify quite quickly, is this something that might have been an issue about it being damaged or it being lost in the course of it being emptied, so that we can then make an assessment about actually, can we just move this forward to, yes, it needs to be replaced, yes, it needs to be, you know, whatever needs to happen, or actually was it down to something else? There are other reasons why bins go missing, and just being able to identify what that is rather than them all having to come through ourselves, which would be so much better for, you know, internally, but also for the customer as well.
I'm sure it's on the radar, but I wonder as well if perhaps there could be some work on incentivizing refuse collection to report when a bin is lost or missing on their, you know, their watch, that in a way that doesn't then come back to punish them, because it seems to me that really seems to be the ultimate easy solution.
So just on that point, what I'm aware of is that there's ongoing work around their business practice processes and their systems that they have available on each of the wagons and or the vehicles used within the collections. And what they're looking at is there a better way? Because we've had a lot of, in the past, we've had cards left, we've got cameras on some wagons and all that sort of stuff. So they are looking and taking steps of using not just the complaints information, but looking at the cost and the implication, the time and the resource around reporting, not just for us, but as Cass said as well, for the customers and in different service areas. What is that end-to-end cost of missing or potentially missing or being reported as missing? And what we're looking at is there another way to tackle this that is still providing some oversight and overview and audit functions, and or looking at, is there a better reporting way, is there a better identifying way and replacing, or rather than making a customer or having to take it through the complaints route before they are issued with a new bin or a replacement bin? Because I can't remember off the top of my head what the cost of a replacement bin is, either to the council or the resident. However, if you look at then what is that cost internally to the managing and the processes and the systems and the reporting, and that would obviously be a paper and a business case and a policy decision, etc., if there was a different route to take. But yes, it is being looked at and is always revisited at all times.
I would just add to that as well, that it's sometimes some of the difficulty is the crews might not necessarily even themselves pick up when they damage, when I'm saying they're damage, and I'm trying to move very much away from that because it's not them damaging it. It's just getting damaged in the course of it being emptied. And because they're working at speed and they're kind of, you know, moving things around, they might not necessarily have noticed something that then, you know, a customer or resident does notice. So they can't always, it's not always a failure in reporting. But what the managers are aware of is where some of the weaknesses might be and whether that's likely to have been a damage as a result of that.
Okay, Councillor Fisher.
Chair, I know it's on page 11 of the report. It points out that we're having difficulty recruiting people to children's service and adult social care posts, and we're having to use agency staff. Has there been any analysis done of whether the complaints that are emanating to the council are coming from agency staff or from our own permanent staff? Because obviously, if it is agency staff that are incurring more, it might imply that we need to train them better before they start work and make sure they're aware of council policies and procedures. I just don't know, has any work been done on that or not?
Just for clarity quickly, we're on page 53 of our report pack, but page 11 within the
Yes, sorry,
of the
page 11
report.
within the main report. Yes, that's great.
There hasn't been any drill down or full analysis done of where a complaint is made about a failure or an action not taken or not in time action and the member of staff and or the service area that refers to, there hasn't been any drill down or analysis on is that a permanent member of staff and or when did that permanent member of staff last do their training and or last have appropriate counsel and or professional training and or the same for agency staff. If that is something Scrutiny would like us to go away and look at, I can always look to see if we can interrogate the systems backwards, if that makes sense, to see if there is any further information we can pull out in respect of that and or look at how we do that or do it better for you going forward.
I brought it up is that a large number of complaints in schools come from supply teachers who are perhaps not as familiar with the procedures within the school. So
I guess that might be one for the Children Education Communities Scrutiny Committee to consider whether they want to delve a little bit deeper into that. Any further questions from members? I've got a couple, as always. Right, I shall plough on in, but if you think of anything, just give me a wave. I just wanted to check, and I don't know whether you'll have the data to hand or not. Page 48, right at the bottom on the last bullet point there, it says that 86% of all detailed investigations were upheld. This compares to an average of 64% in similar authorities. However, when considered all decided cases, it is 26% upheld. And I just wanted to pick within that. So that 64% in similar authorities, is that of their detailed investigations? So we're a bit higher than similar authorities in our detailed investigations. And then the 26% upheld across all, how does that then compare to similar authorities? Do we have that data to hand or?
So you are correct, Councillor Chair, that it is a higher percentage in City of York Council for the detailed investigations that are upheld than across similar authorities. The figure of the 26% was our own analysis, further analysis of the information that the Ombudsman publishes. They don't publish that detail for other local authorities, and it would be whether other local authorities through our networks do have that other detail to hand. I can certainly ask through the link group if they have done that further drill down, but at the moment I don't have it, and we wouldn't be able to get it off the Ombudsman's published website. It is just our further analysis of the cases that are done through the local government ombudsman.
Because I think as a small authority, statistically, you could only have a small number of upheld cases that could then skew our percentage higher. So in one sense, I'm sort of reasonably comfortable with that discrepancy. But if on all of our complaints, we were actually significantly higher than similar local authorities, I think you might start to get more concerned at that point. So I think if there's a way of either speaking to sort of friendly other local authorities or you know, some way getting a bit of data as to what their overall decided cases is, even if it's ballpark, I think that would be helpful for us just to understand a little bit more what's happening in York. Another question I just wanted to ask you, which is kind of relates to the sort of main theme that you've talked about, and so you know this sort of main theme about the lack of action potentially on complaints, and you know, I think I'd highlighted page 59. There's various bits there where there's, I think, you know, 70% of stage 2 complaints are over time scale and that sort of thing. So you've talked a little bit about how you might be thinking about what that data might be actually telling us. Is it possible within these data sets to do kind of real-time monitoring, or do you have to kind of wait till all the cases have gone through and do a kind of a year-end review? Because I'm just thinking in terms of if you're asking for changes in process, how do you check in year that those processes are successful and that we're on the right track?
So all managers and heads of service and above in the council have access to what's the key performance, the KPI machine within the council. So that allows them within It's live as of yesterday's cases and updates to the case management system that we use in complaints. We've also recently, working with business intelligence, built an automated report to go to children's social care managers in the first instance, showing all their complaints for this reporting cycle and the status of where they are, including if they've completed, what the actions and recommendations are that they have to follow up. And that goes out once a week to those senior managers. So we're just looking at the improvements and or the questions and or what that allows us to do. And then we hopefully will mirror it in adults and then in corporate complaints. The other thing is that Kath is on most directorate management team meetings and or will go to team meetings and do updates on their particular areas and what's coming up for them, what's starting to be an area of concern, or even promote their successes and look at how that learning from one directorate management team can move into others and other team meetings. So yes, there is the ability to do that more real-time management and monitoring and support service areas. There is also the it's at least quarterly I go to audit and governance with the quarterly performance reports, which includes ombudsman cases. And there is also the very small amount of information that I think comes to yourself through business intelligence, the finance and corporate performance, and that's the previous reporting quarter. So it's that in year by quarter that you get that information. So there is that ability to manage in a bit sooner than these ones.
Part of the reason for my sort of question was just been sort of reflecting on Councillor Fenton's suggestion earlier on about, you know, could all of the responses to complaints come via yourselves? And my concern with that would be that you potentially generate a whole layer of bureaucracy that doesn't necessarily get you a gain. But actually, if you could pick a small area to say, can you trial going through this for say 3 months or 6 months and monitor it and see that it has an impact before then rolling it out, that potentially, so, but the systems by the sounds of it would allow you to do that if that was the way that you wanted to go.
It's certainly a really helpful suggestion, and it is something that we'll pick up with the probably with children's social care, bearing in mind that we've just started that weekly report with them, but it's also just around the successes and the improvements that we've made around the corporate complaints, and where we've been able to show that with taking the process back into the corporate governance team rather than out into the service area, where we have shown that very significant uplift in at least responses going out in a timely way. So yeah.
The one other question that I had, and I'm just looking around if anybody's flagging for anything else, it's just on page 95. It's in the responses from the local government ombudsman, and right at the bottom. So they all sort of mainly seem to make sense to me. And then the last one says, other reason not to investigate. And it doesn't give any more detail. And I just wondered if you knew any more detail about that, or it just seemed, I'm always wary of something that just says other.
What I can do is go back into the case and give you the full reason for why that was it appears to be yeah, they've chosen not to investigate for an other reason, and usually that is that we've either not exhausted the council procedures and they refer back to us, or there's been a satisfactory remedy already in place. But it is also, it's a housing ombudsman and not a local government social care ombudsman report. So their reasons are slightly different. But yes, I will go away and send back out to committee what the details of that one is, and then make sure for next report that we put the better key in that explains that.
That'd be helpful, but don't spend ages on it. It was more just it jumped out at me as, you know, all the rest of them sort of seemed relatively self-explanatory, and then there was just that one that just seemed a bit odd.
From memory, but I would have to check it. I think it's because this is the local government, and I think they were saying it's not ours, it's the housing ombudsman to investigate. But I will check it for you.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So I'm not seeing any further hands. So in which case I will thank you both for your time this evening and for bringing the report to us, and look forward to receiving those bits and bobs of extra information. Thank you very much. What I'm going to do now is just take a very, very short 5-minute adjournment. So if we could just come back at 6:45, there's not much further on the agenda to go, but I have made promises that rather than going in long meetings, we'll take adjournments around the hour mark or at an appropriate time thereafter. So if we just stop now and come back at 2:45. Thank you. Right, welcome back, everybody, to this evening's meeting of Customer Corporate Services Scrutiny Management Committee. We are up to agenda item 8, which is the schedule of petitions, which has been drawn together by Democratic Services. So I'll invite Dawn just to give us a brief overview.
Just a few background comments, basically. The last time you had this was December 21, which was before the petition scheme was actually included in the Constitution, which Council adopted in March 22. Hence my this time including the actual extract from the Constitution, so that you're very, very clear about what it says and what the expectations are in relation to your handling of petitions. So what you've got is the schedule of petitions, insofar as we are aware of it, that have been reported to Council and have otherwise been received in the Council since December 21. I was just saying to the Chair, actually, there looks to have been, when you look at that schedule, there's a slight difference in the reporting that we're getting from directorates now, which normally what happened prior to, if I may say, prior to COVID and prior to the last report coming to this committee, was that you would receive an indication of the action that had been taken in relation to the petition, even if that was only just to refer it to the executive member and a decision was pending. At least then you would have known what steps have been taken and whether you wish to comment on those steps or to review any further action. I've just noticed from looking at the schedule that that's not been the case this time round in a number of cases. It clearly says awaiting CSMC's views. So I would suggest to you that if you are unhappy with that, because you are unable at this point to comment on any actions because you don't know what they are, because they're awaiting your views, you are not the decision makers on these petitions. The process for CSMC was actually, you know, how would you reflect on any of the actions that have been taken? Do you wish to delve a bit deeper? Do you wish to suggest a closer review on inspection, etc.? So I will leave that on the table for you to consider about whether you wish to confirm what your expectations are in relation to handling some of the petitions.
Thanks for that, Dawn. I think the way that I'd like to sort of handle this then is, I think it is worth us just going through and just checking that we're satisfied with the way that each of these petitions has been dealt with, and that doesn't need to take long, don't worry. But I think that I would like to make clear from the Chair's position that my expectation is not that a petition will come into the Council and nothing will happen until we receive a schedule of petitions. I think we do need to be really clear that the expectation is that if there is action that can be taken, if there are decision makers who can receive information relating to petitions, they shouldn't be waiting this committee to say, oh yeah, fine, on you go. Because as I think you'll be aware, we don't get the schedule of petitions on a particularly regular basis. It's not a routine standing item for us. And I would hate to think that people have been waiting for 6 months or a year for us to say, fine, send it to an exec member decision session. So I think we can pick that up outside of the meeting, just to be absolutely clear in terms of everybody's understanding of the process for handling petitions. And then just in terms of for this meeting, obviously within the schedule, there are some which have got clear outcomes. It's just there to note. I think we're likely to be satisfied with what's happened. There are perhaps others where we may want to ask a little bit more about what is happening. And you'll see on page 100, within the options there, paragraph 6, this scheme of petitions sets out a number of actions that we can choose to take as a committee. So I think probably the simplest thing for me to do is to just go through, well, actually, perhaps rather than me going through line by line, if people have got any petitions that they have got any concerns or anything that they wish to raise, if you want to indicate now. Otherwise, I'll take it as read that you're satisfied with the outcomes. And then I think the ones that don't currently have an outcome, we can just pick those out and decide if there's anything that we need to do. Councillor Rowley.
It's just a point of clarity, really. I mean, it's good to have the report, but the way in which it's kind of tabulated, don't know how you solve it really, but at the top of each page, so, you know, on page 109, it tells us what the columns are. You go to page 115, you've forgotten what the columns are, you've got to go back. Is there any way in looking at the report that can be sorted? The other thing that I have noticed with some of the petitions is that they don't all have the number of approximate signatures that are on them. I'm just curious, is that because we don't know, or because of the type of petition that it was? I'm just curious. That's all.
Shall I comment on that, Chair? In terms of tabulation, yes, we can just repeat the headers on each page.
Brilliant, thank you.
That's relatively
Because I'm getting
straightforward.
old, apparently. So.
Bit more work for us, but relatively straightforward. Did you? Okay, we'll look at that outside. Yeah, might be the system that's being used. Yeah.
Willingness is appreciated.
Yeah. In terms of the comment about the number of signatories, I suspect because we don't input the information. The information is input by the relevant directorate to which the petition is referred or even falls within upon receipt within the council. So it will be very much dependent upon whether the petition at the top says the number of signatories. Otherwise, you can imagine it's henceforward quite a lot of work to go through and count those signatories.
And would that be the case with petition 180, where there were 2,734 postcards apparently, brilliantly staged, I have to say, by our colleagues at the full council meeting?
That one we will have known about because there was a summary report that came to this committee. Chair will remember probably better than I do, that told us precisely how many of those there were.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any other comments or questions on specifics, Councillor Baker?
Thanks, Chair. Just for consistency, as Councillor Fisher declared at the beginning, I was the member who presented the very last one on the list, 182. But it's just a question about clarity. So were you saying at the beginning, Chair, that our role is mainly process orientated rather than outcome orientated, but that wouldn't exclude there being an outcome of any petition that this committee decided to discuss at more length? Is that also an option?
So you're right, and it doesn't. If you were to look at what this committee has always said in the past, is that it would like to look at the steps that have been put in place by relevant directorates. For example, referring a petition to an executive member decision-making session to consider, so that it can review what steps or actions may be proposed, etc. If it were to be unhappy or think collectively that there is a better way of handling a petition, or there's a better way of handling one of the potential outcomes, you can look into reviewing that in accordance with, if you look at paragraph 7 in the cover report, Rosie, on page 100. So in the petition scheme, the committee may call for reports and undertake reviews in relation to petitions where it is concerned that they have not been dealt with properly. Okay.
So in specific relation to that petition, which doesn't have an action next to it, as doesn't the one above it, my suggestion would be that actually we refer both of those on to the exec member decision session as the appropriate place for them to be considered. And actually taking us right the way back to the top to 162 and 163, that's exactly what did happen with those petitions. They went to the exec member decision session. Actually, the ward members who put the petitions in weren't satisfied with the outcome, and you may remember that they were then called in and came to this committee, and there was a whole thing that happened from it. But from the schedule of petitions point of view, what we're looking at is, has the petition been appropriately addressed or dealt with through a mechanism or a process? So I think, looking through, a large number of them, to my mind, are more than adequately being addressed. They've gone to the appropriate places, and I think we can note them and strike them off the list. We've obviously made the comment about one or two of them there which say awaiting CSMC, and I think that the feedback will be, from my perspective, to say, no, you're not waiting for CSMC, crack on with it. And actually, largely speaking, I'm not particularly interested in us going through and working out what to do with each individual petition. As I say, I'm happy to suggest, for example, the last couple do go just to the exec member decision session, or we could just blanketly say, in the first instance, we would expect them to go to the exec member decision session for consideration, and then we'd like a review back in due course as to what steps have been taken. I'm seeing quite a lot of nods around the head at that suggestion. So should we take that course of action?
What was that?
Yeah. Okay. So are your nods sufficient as a that's our recommendation? Are we all happy that that's what we're doing? Yeah.
Fine.
Fab. In which case, unless anybody else has anything else on that, I can move us on. No. So that takes us then to agenda item 9, which is the monitoring and tracking of approved council motions. And in a similar vein, Dawn, if you could just talk us through very quickly what we have here, and then in effect we have a similar sort of thing with a series of outcomes.
Yeah. So this report you have asked to receive biannually. This is the last time we had one was March, I think. Yes, sorry, yeah, March 22. And it deals with the motions that have been considered by council since you last received this report. You will notice that on which is Annex A, basically the schedule, and in there that basically, I mean, Bryn will confirm this, but basically this schedule is then looked at corporate management team, which is all the corporate directors and directors of the authority, and they will populate the final common basically in terms of actions that have been taken in response to the petitions, the motions that have been approved by full council. So you'll see most of the actions in relation to those motions have been populated. Not all have been completed, but most of the information has been populated now. And then there's also a section at the back of that annex, which actually looks more historically and retrospectively into ones that have been completed. Whether you wish to continue to receive that, be up to you.
So on that latter point, I think what we had previously said that we would do is take a similar approach than we used to take with the scrutiny reviews, and particularly outcomes of scrutiny reviews, where we would receive something back 6 months afterwards saying what hasn't been done, and then we would either strike it off our list if we're satisfied it had been dealt with, or we'd keep monitoring it further if we felt we needed to. I think probably for ease, the simplest thing right now might be for myself and Vice Chair to just go through this list of, because I think actually quite a few of these we've previously said we don't need to see these again. That's my sense. There are one or two that I've just got a couple of questions that we might want to think about how we feedback. I'm happy just to take any other questions or queries if anybody else has anything before I just raise them. So I just wanted to note on page 140 that really in progress as a comment is just not enough. So if we can feed back to the relevant officers that it doesn't need to be much, but pretty much everything else has got at least a sentence that just says this is vaguely what's happening. And that's then helpful, I think, for us as a committee to feel confident that actions are being taken, or that there's reasons why steps can't be taken, both of which are fine, but in progress. I could do with a bit more than that. And in a similar vein, on page 138, I don't know whether it's just that a box has been deleted or copied wrong or something, but the clean up York's rivers, there's a blank box, and then the next box down just says as above. So it would just be, again, if we can just query that for the next time it comes to us, so we've got a little bit of information. Yeah, it does suggest something might have been meant to be there. The only other point, sorry, councillor Norman.
Just to add in that on page 149, the entirety of the motion on your proposer's fracking has the similar issue. There is nothing in the box. Presumably we are doing something.
One would hope so, but again, I think if we can just clarify that for the next time that comes to us. I think inevitably there will be occasions where there are odd bits missing, and it is actually great to have this level of detail, generally speaking. Councillor Fisher. I know
Yeah, that was actually my motion. I think the government sorted the problem out. Public pressure, the government sorted it out, because I mean there's no fracking allowed now. So do we need to do anything?
Fair point. Fair point. In which case we maybe just put a note in there.
Well, if we just clarify. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that. Just advising that so that you're not reliant on Tony being here at this meeting too, etc. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So the one that I think we might need to just think a little bit more about whether there's anything that we can or should do from this committee is on page 127. The third box down, which is around ward councillor involvement in the 106 process. And I think that the response there is a factually accurate response that ward councillors can't be involved in negotiating in 106, and I think that's absolutely correct and fair. And I think it has been said to us previously that ward councillors can put forward schemes or suggestions of like a bucket list of things that should some 106 money come their way, these are the things that would be the priorities. But I don't think anything's proactively been done about that. And I think that the point of the motion really was calling for a little bit more robust of a framework to be able to take local knowledge and ward councillor knowledge and feedback to shape the 106 negotiations or agreements as and when they are done.
I'm not aware that anything has been done in relation to that, Chair. I think the other challenge that may or may not have been relayed to members is, of course, that any section 106 agreement must meet the statutory tests in fairly and reasonably relating to the development. So the danger of members having a wish list of things they want is if it doesn't actually relate to the development in statutory terms, then it's ultra vires anyway, and would simply be struck out by a court if it was challenged. So it's within that framework that member involvement has to be dealt with. That's why really 106s tend to be dealt with by committees, by planning committees as they are considering the applications.
I'll come to you just 1 second, Councillor Fenton. I think that absolutely agree and understood. I think that where the discussion has been, and I think probably what some of the motivation of the motion was around, was that actually on occasion there can be 106 agreements that say we're going to give money to, I don't know, the basketball club here, which actually may have just been ward funded, and the bowling club over there might be desperate for money, and that 106 money should have gone there.
Absolutely.
But the planning committees are told that they then can't shape or change a 106 agreement once it's got to that stage. So it's just trying to kind of square that circle there. From a committee's point of view, because I'm conscious that we're not going to resolve that this evening, but it's just whether or not there's anything that we can do just to kind of push back a little bit perhaps on that outcome, because I don't think it's inaccurate, but I also, from my perspective, don't feel that that satisfactorily addresses what was being pushed for, and I think from memory universally backed, you know, in terms of the motion itself.
Why don't we ask the question of officers, what exactly has been done in relation to seeking information from ward councillors? Is that the point you're making, Johnny?
Well, I think, yes, it's what's been done, but it's also trying to have a mechanism that's in place that's non-ongoing, because it needs to not be we've asked you once and now that's the list that we're going to work from for the next 10 years. It almost needs to be a kind of once a year, is there, can you do it through a ward committee, or can you do it through once a year through the ward team? They just review what they think are the priority areas, or it's just how can you capture that bit of local knowledge that we have? Because we'll all have it. I'm sure everybody in our wards will have a sense of, actually, if there was some money for a sporting club, this is the sporting club that would most benefit of the 3 in the ward, or whatever it might be.
So would it be worth, I'm conscious we've been here in the past really with section 106s, but would it be worth having an overview report on what that process is? And if that therefore is lacking that step, you again have the officers here supporting that process, in terms of not just the planners, but maybe community involvement. Maybe we get Laura Williams in alongside the planner, and you have that conversation, ask that question, and they build it into the process if it's a viable process. And I don't know, I'm thinking on my feet with that one. But it's just that would be a hook, is what I'm saying. That would give you a hook. Have a conversation.
That sounds like a potential route. Councillor Fenton, you had a hand up, and then we've got Councillor Musson as well.
Yeah, I think in the action taken, ward members could outline, but what hasn't been articulated is how, to whom, at what point. Because the motion didn't ask for members to be involved in negotiations with developers. It talks about priorities of individual communities are taken into account prior to opening negotiations with developers, because by the time it gets to committee and we're presented with a list of beneficiaries that don't make an awful lot of sense in some cases, it's just trying to have as Don said, an earlier step in the process that is legally appropriate. But yeah, it does provide the mechanism that the motion called for.
If I can add, some of that then comes back to the drafting practices that we use. And if to pick the example you've used, if you're talking about 106 funding for a sports club, well, actually, if you draft the agreement in such a way that you aren't identifying the sports club in question and merely sporting facilities within the vicinity, then actually you then leave the decision as to which club you're talking about to after the event, rather than having to specify it up front. Speaking as somebody who spent the thick end of 20 years of his career drafting section 106 agreements, amongst other things, that's certainly the approach I've adopted. That, you can identify the need for a particular type of funding without necessarily identifying the ultimate destination of that funding.
That's perhaps then something else. This sounds to me like we're drafting an overview report here, which I think would be really useful, because I think that's a very good suggestion. Councillor Musson.
I was just going to ask whether we draft our own ward priorities, we put them in words on paper with the CIO. Those, I assume, are not allowed to be published. So why can't all the ward priorities be publicly available? They're all quite generic things, good things we all want to do. And the ward funding records are freely available on open data. You can see in specific wards which organisations routinely apply for yearly grants for projects that they could put forward to fund, or what kind of generally we're spending the money on.
I guess my only thought with that would be that knowing how stretched planning officers are, as are most parts of the council, them having time to go through and check what has and hasn't been funded to work out what might be an appropriate thing to fund might be more time consuming than a simpler method to sort of say, these are our top 5 areas, or as Bryn's suggesting, perhaps reviewing how it's drafted, so it's a bit more openness within it. Councillor Hallier.
Presumably the planning officer gets a planning application, they then send out for a consultation with green space or schools or sports people. Could that sports officer who then replies back to the planner not just sort of copy in at some point the ward councillors and say, this is what I'm suggesting for this contribution, And then at that point, they could say, that seems sensible or not.
I think that is something that's been asked for previously. And again, I think that would be potentially another really simple way of just closing that circle. So I think, to me, it seems like what we should do is, if we get a scoping, sorry, am I using the right word? Scoping overview?
I would say
overview report.
because what you want is a factual report on what we're doing and receive that conversation here. Then you can chip in.
Yeah.
You know, and perhaps what it means, I think what I would suggest is, because I'm very conscious we've been here with section 106s before and overview reports. And we're still chipping away now. So I think being very explicit with officers about what you require as part of that overview, and that's perhaps where we can have a conversation outside the meeting, Bryn, you know, and involve the right officers and bring in the community involvement team at the same time. So that you get what you're wanting to get to, rather than get the same standard overview report you get every time about section 106 agreements, which is.
Well, I think we've had 2 or 3 viable concrete options. I think if we can either review back over the webcast or whatever it is that we need to do, just to put those all together, check that each of them are viable, and then we could perhaps make a recommendation based on those as to what we think might be the best way forward. And that would seem to be a fairly constructive outcome. Okay, so unless there's anything else on motions, Councillor Pearson.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a very minor point, just on the table with the motions listed on it, that I would recommend in future that we include the job title and not just the name of the person or the councillor or the officer. Just because I've noticed that, for example, executive members have changed and, for example, staff have left. So just in terms of keeping up to date with who should be looking after that motion.
I spotted that. I'll feed that back, because we don't compile this. This is compiled. We add the motions on, but all the columns where the updates with staff names, for instance, which I also spotted, have been included. So I'll feed that back to the people that get involved in compiling. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So moves on then to agenda item 10, which is the work plan. It is all pretty much as it is. The next meeting of CSMC in March is timetabled to be our last meeting in this municipal year. There's a couple of things that are to be confirmed, because Councillor Fenton and I were waiting on some outcomes of bits of government legislation, the devolution update, for example, and I think we were aware that the voter ID motion would potentially go forward. So we'll tighten that up, see whether or not we can get everything that's on there. It maybe looks a little bit big to me to be doing everything, but we'll think about what we do and bring forward. And the other thing I just wanted to mention at this stage was just taking us right back to the start of the meeting with the request from the public speaker about some sort of a scrutiny into the Christmas market. Now, I think that the public speaker was specifically thinking about access. I don't know about other members. I've certainly had comments in the past from local traders who have concerns about the impact that the Christmas market has on their year-round trading, but obviously there's also that huge influx of visitors, which you would hope would benefit local traders as well. So I'm wondering whether it might be something that could form the topic of something similar to the nighttime economy review that was done 2 or 3 years ago, and I think was widely welcomed. My sense is that we can't be making a decision this evening about what we do or don't do with it, and I'm very conscious, as I just said, that we've got one more meeting of this committee. Most of the other committees will be meeting only once or twice more between now and May, but I think that what we'll do, and Dawn, if you could perhaps just clarify what the mechanism would be for how we record that request for a scrutiny review, so that we make sure that it is considered in an appropriate place and then either taken forward or not, according to whoever is in the post or position to make those decisions.
Yeah, So it is some time since we received a request directly from a member of the public. So there are several ways to skin a cat in this instance. The member of the public could submit. The old-fashioned and traditional way of doing this would be via a scrutiny topic registration form, which we can provide to Flick, so that she can complete the information on that, and then we can process it accordingly. And as you rightly say, Chair, the difficulty with the timing of that right now, and I appreciate, you know, to some extent that's an irrelevance and irrelevance, you know, because we're coming up to the end of not just a municipal year, but the end of a whole 4-year cycle, if you like, with the election just around the corner in May. So there wouldn't be any time, I suspect, even once that review were to be honed down, it would have to then be agreed. And you're not in a position tonight to agree anything because you've got no feasibility assessment before you. So if the topic registration were to be submitted, ordinarily what would happen, there would be a feasibility report that went to the appropriate committee to undertake that review based on the submission received. And that would include soundings from officers and other relevant parties, stakeholders, particularly when you're talking about Christmas markets. So that would take some time to put together. It would go to the appropriate committee, and they would then, the members of that committee would assess whether it was a viable scrutiny review, bearing in mind what the potential outcomes were, what was wanted to be achieved, the resources available to do it, all those sort of aspects, and the will amongst the particular committee. And that would ordinarily be the process. If, however, a member themselves thought that would be a good review and wanted to work with Flick to hone in that review, to hone that down to what was a feasible and achievable review, then obviously it would be not necessarily a topic registration form if it were to be a member of the said committee. That's why it gets complicated at that point, but the basic starting point will be a topic registration form from Flick. Yeah.
It seems to me then that the simplest way of dealing with that right now would be to ask Jane if you're happy to just go back to Flick and see if she's happy to do a topic registration form. And then that means there's a sort of formal process, there's a paper trail, because I think that the difficulty now, even if any member around the table were thinking this is a good idea for a topic, and it's certainly something that's been raised with me with market traders and one or two others over the years. There's been some questions about the way in which the Christmas market is managed. So I think there probably is something within that scrutiny could add value on. But I think it's about getting something logged in the system now that can be picked up by whoever is on the committee in the point at which they'll be able to actually do anything meaningful with it. So let's start with that as our starting point.
And I think just to add to that, Chair, there will obviously be the need for some, in fact, Bryn and I were talking about this prior to the meeting. There will need to be some kind of process for work planning in the municipal year, in the new municipal year. And that would be an ideal point at which, if Flick has been willing to then complete the form and submit it into the process, that would be an ideal point at which to pick it up and assess its level of priority amongst all the resources, etc.
Okay, so unless anybody else has anything else on the work plan, I can move us on to agenda item 11, which is urgent business. And surprise, surprise, we have no urgent business. Therefore, I can just thank you all for your attendance this evening and draw the meeting to a close. Thank you very much. Yeah.